Wow, you really weren't kidding when you said these articles on the 2024 election were a powder keg. It's October, just weeks left, and things are getting, well, kind of scary.
It's interesting, right? With everything that's happened, you'd think public opinion would have shifted more drastically, but the polls are essentially unmoved.
That's what's crazy to me. CNN's Stephen Collinson, he points out that Harris and Trump are practically tied, which is wild considering, well, everything. I mean, Collinson even mentions those two assassination attempts against Trump. I can't remember anything like that in recent history. What kind of impact does something like that usually have on an election?
Well, historically, it can really go a bunch of different ways. Sometimes it creates this rally around the flag effect where because people are concerned, they actually become more supportive.
Yeah.
But sometimes they can also create this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that makes people question everything. The country, the leadership, it's unnerving.
It is unnerving, and given everything else that's happening, I mean, this isn't just about political debates anymore. Collinson highlights some serious stuff. Potential war, the economy might be on the verge of tanking, we've got a hurricane, all in the last few weeks. It's a lot.
And that's what makes this election so different. These aren't just talking points anymore, This is real life, impacting people right now, making them really think about who they want in charge during times like these.
I gotta say, it does feel a little like we're living in an episode of House of Cards with all this happening at once.
It's high stakes for everyone, that's for sure. Collinson's argument is that this election is going to have massive consequences on everyone here and abroad.
So let's dive into some of the specifics, starting with Harris. Collinson seems to think she's really got her hands full, grappling with multiple crises all at once. He specifically calls out that potential war in the Middle East. Then you've got the port worker strike, and of course, trying to manage the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Is it normal for a president to be facing this much all at once during an election, or is this unusual even for this political climate?
Well, every administration has its curveballs, right? That's part of the job. But the timing and, frankly, the magnitude of these events this close to the election, it's significant. It feeds into this narrative that Biden and Harris are maybe not in control as much as they need to be in this post-pandemic world.
So you're saying it brings up questions about their competence, about whether they can handle a crisis?
Exactly. And that narrative, whether it's accurate or not, can be extremely damaging in an election, especially when you've got the opposing candidate using it to their advantage.
And we know how good at that someone like Trump can be.
Right. It's all about perception.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're seeing, isn't it, with Trump's campaign, I mean. While Harris is busy putting out fires left and right, Trump's past legal troubles, they're back in the headlines.
Because of that document, right? The one from the special counsel's investigation, the one about the 2020 election.
That's the one. 165 pages outlining their case against Trump, basically alleging he tried to overturn the election results.
Collinson called it a bombshell. Is that like hype, or is it really that big of a deal?
It's a pretty big deal. It's essentially a roadmap of the special counsel's case, right? It alleges that Trump was directly involved, that he coordinated this whole effort to undermine the election.
Wow. Okay, and they actually have evidence of this.
They even have direct quotes from Trump, like from his own mouth.
Like what?
Well, for example, he allegedly told his team something like, "It doesn't matter if you won or lost, you still got to fight like hell."
See, now that's just, I mean, you don't have to be a legal scholar to see how problematic that is. It does kind of sound like he's saying, I want to stay in power no matter what the voters said.
Right.
So how much weight does this document carry? Could it actually sway undecided voters, or is it just going to get buried under everything else that's going on?
It's really hard to tell. But this is bigger than just legal trouble for Trump,
Yeah.
It calls into question the entire democratic system. Undecided voters who are already worried about the stability of the country, this might be all they need to push them over the edge.
But on the other hand, Trump supporters have always seemed to stick by him no matter what.
Exactly. So will it be enough to make a difference? Who knows?
It is interesting, though, to think about it in terms of the bigger picture. Harris, she's dealing with real-time problems, crises that need immediate attention, and Trump's dealing with, like, ghosts of elections past.
And then there's the most volatile situation of all, the Middle East.
Yeah, Collinson called it a powder keg, didn't he? And that's even before Israel launched a ground offensive in Lebanon.
And then assassinated a high-ranking Hezbollah leader.
After Iran attacked them with missiles. And of course, now everyone's on edge, worried this is going to escalate into something much bigger.
Which it very well could.
Yeah.
The situation is incredibly fragile right now, and any wrong move, any miscalculation, could have disastrous consequences.
And of course, where does this leave Biden and Harris? It puts them in an incredibly tough spot, right?
A tightrope walk, for sure.
Yeah. Because they have to be seen as fully supporting Israel, a key ally, while also preventing a full-blown war with Iran. How do you even begin to navigate something like that?
Well, according to Collins and the Biden administration, they're urging restraint from Israel while also reaffirming their commitment to their security. And at the same time, they're doing some back-channel diplomacy with Iran, trying to cool things down.
So basically a whole lot of carefully orchestrated conversations happening behind the scenes.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
A high-stakes game of diplomacy.
Yeah.
It's anyone's guess how this will play out.
And it's not just the international pressure they're under. Things aren't exactly calm and collected here in the U.S. either, what with this port worker strike. Collinson mentioned it could have a ripple effect. He said it could impact the entire U.S. economy.
He's not wrong. Nearly 50,000 workers are on strike, which means shortages, price hikes. It's not looking good.
Which puts even more pressure on Biden, right?
Huge pressure. This is the guy who's built his career on being pro-union, so alienating a key part of his base a few weeks before an election. Risky move.
But if they give in to the union's demands, won't that hurt them too? I mean, wouldn't that lead to even more inflation? And then everyone's unhappy?
Exactly. It's a classic lose-lose situation. If they cave, inflation might go through the roof, everyone's wallets get hit even harder, and his critics can say, see, told you so. But if they play hardball with the union, they risk losing a ton of votes. Talk about a rock in a hard place.
It seems like everything we've talked about so far just highlights how difficult it must be to be in charge, especially during an election year.
It's all about making the tough calls, even when you know you can't please everyone. Every decision has consequences.
It's not like Mother Nature is cutting anyone any breaks, right? Hurricane Helene is just, it's awful, all the devastation. Collinson said the death toll is already at 189.
And he's right. It's the deadliest one to hit the mainland since Katrina.
Which is just, wow. You know, it makes you think about more than just the immediate tragedy, right? It makes you think about the politics of it all. Does something like this actually impact an election?
It does, but it's complicated.
Right.
Sometimes you get that rally around the flag kind of thing where people want to put aside their differences, support the country. We saw that after 9/11.
Right, everyone comes together.
But it's not always that simple. After the initial shock wears off, people start looking at the government's response. How much help is getting where it needs to be? How quickly?
So are you saying that Biden and Harris are particularly vulnerable on this?
Collinson seems to think so. He pointed out that Trump's already using it, saying Biden's being too slow, that he doesn't care. Whether or not voters buy it, who knows? But it's one more thing to think about in an already chaotic election.
It really feels like we're at a tipping point here. Just weeks left, and both candidates have got all these huge, unprecedented challenges. What should we be paying attention to most closely from here on out?
I think the biggest questions are, can Biden handle all this? Can his administration actually tackle these immediate problems? And can they project an image of, like, we got this, you know? Because if voters think they're in over their heads.
That's not good. Anything else we should be watching for?
Pay attention to how these big dramatic events shape the story of the election. Are voters more focused on the day-to-day stuff, the crises? Or will they be swayed more by the whole us versus them thing? At the end of the day, it's going to come down to which message resonates more.
It's crazy how these big events, stuff that seems totally outside of politics, can impact something as important as an election. It makes you realize it's not just about policies, it's about, like, who we are, you know, and what kind of future we want.
Well, you've certainly given us a lot to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.